Hey everyone, thanks for joining us, watching. And we're gonna put together these little videos. We're building out a client site. They gave us permission to kind of go behind the scenes and share with everyone about how we're building the site. It is um, in the big picture of things, it's kind of a basic marketing site for an architecture firm, and it's really our first Craft 5 project that we're starting from the beginning. So there's some aspects for us that we wanted to talk through about how we've done things in previous from Craft 2, 3, and 4, and how things are happening in 5, but also bigger than that of like just how we approach projects from design, taking them and then building out in the site. And so Michael often has this role of taking the design files and then building out the initial build in this phase. And so Michael is here and is basically going to be demoing and showing us week by week what he's been working on and how he's approaching it. And just kind of giving us a behind the scenes walk. I'm less engaged in this project. So it's for me, it's also kind of like asking questions like, how are we doing this? And revealing that a bit and kind of calling out different pieces. So yeah, so without further ado, we're just gonna jump in. But if you haven't met Michael, if you're new wherever, then um, Michael and I, what we don't remember how long anymore, but 11 years, right? We've been
I think
together like in foster commerce.
11 or 12, maybe, I think now. Yeah.
That's approaching. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so we've been working together, kind of back in the days of Expression Engine originally, and then in the craft world. So it's we've kind of established a way of working and building sites, and so a lot of that comes from Michael's thinking that we have. So, Michael, nice to have you.
Nice to be here.
All right. So, without further ado, how about we just jump in? So, we've got this. We've got designs approved, right? So, we finished the design rounds. Cloud did a phenomenal job working with Matt, our account manager, kind of going through that. And so now it's handed off to you. You are
Mhm.
in our structure for this project. You are the lead developer, and so you're the one who's taking responsibility and ownership of this build at this stage during the pre-launch kind of build out. Working with Matt as the account manager, kind of make sure that the project's kind of moving forward, and with the client. And y'all are having weekly sessions with the client too, right?
Mhm.
Cool.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Yeah. With the kind of like going over the things that were done in the past week and what we're going to be working on next week. So it's a way of keeping them up to date on the process.
Awesome. And so in that same kind of thing, we're going to meet together on a weekly basis. For those of you who don't know, if you share, we at Foster Commerce do weekly sprints. Essentially, and our sprints go from Thursday to Wednesday. Michael and I are going to be meeting on Thursdays most of the time, and kind of talk about what he's done over the previous week. And then we may not talk about what's coming next, but at least what's been done. And so that's how we just break down our work as well. So that's something we'll talk about, as well as like how Michael defines like what is the goal for the week. And that's really where we kind of keep our focus. We have the big picture in mind of like, obviously we got to launch, we got to get towards that, but we break it down into smaller chunks so that in the week, Michael really only has to think about what he's doing this week. And so that's true for all of our developers across all of our projects. And we break everything down into weekly chunks, and just kind of narrow our focus. So yeah, so Michael, why don't you take me back? So you were handed designs. How about you walk us through like what you were handed, and then how you then have to create the work from there, right? You have to kind of say, I got designs now. Now what? Right. And spec that out. Would you mind just kind of showing us around, even if it's diving into, we use Basecamp for our project management system and
Mhm.
communication, the design file. Once you introduce me, I'm gonna share the screen there, and yeah, walk us
Mhm.
through how you started this project.
Yeah, so in the initial stage, like with any project that we get our hands on, is to either via design wise or looking at sort of like descriptions of functionality descriptions and content that needs to be modeled. You know, what is the content that's going to be on the site? How is it going to be worked with? So those are the initial ones. In this case, we're kind of going off of their existing site, which they have the sort of, at least to get an idea of the structure of where data should be and how it should be modeled. But at the same time, we're using the new designs to kind of augment that and look at that. There are some changes that the design sort of evokes, which changes to the data model, which is what we've use as kind of like a baseline in this case is looking at the design and say, okay, we know that they're going to want a blog section. We know that they're going to want a project section. There's going to be some way of searching through all of this content and stuff like that. So our first step is kind of like just going and defining those data structures basically. And we tend to do these in cards. In this case, well, one of the first steps that we did was actually a little bit different. This was more of like building out the infrastructure to get the site going. And this includes the sort of building out the sections, uh, setting up a repo, some of the basic stuff, installing Craft, in this case 5, which we're working with, and the necessary plugins, which is also something that we think about, okay, which plugins are we going to need, which can be native, which can be just something that we definitely would want as a plugin install. And then just going through and coming up with the different structures to how we want the data. So we'll kind of map this sort of out by looking at the design files. I can maybe jump over to a design file here and we can have a look at it. Let's see here, like these, one of the things that we do that we tend to like to include for the clients is a way for them to build out the pages themselves. These sort of, everybody knows content builder sort of thing like that, but it's something that we feel is important for the client to be able to have some sort of, even if it's just like basic layout of content, but also being able to place the content where they want, in different sections, and how to highlight that content. So we'll generally have, in these cases, some designs that kind of clocking up with some ideas on how content can be placed within the page. And by looking at this, then I kind of go through and say, okay, what are the sort of components that we need in this sort of like builder field? What are these rows that can be sort of free and open for them to edit their content on, and what sort of rows of content do we need that are a little bit more strict? It's kind of informed by the design a bit on how, like, let me just show over here. For some of these rows are very specific and you can't really do much in the way of variations with them. We don't want to give them too many options and variations either, so that can lead to like decision paralysis sometimes. And yeah, just going through it and looking, okay, this would be something that would be in the content builder, but just by a row itself. So thinking
So
about those things.
is
Yeah.
that where you're starting? So in the project, so you're really starting with the page builder, kind of our approach, and so that's you're not starting with a home page, you're not starting with
No.
some other like blog template kind of page. You're going with the
Well,
most
content.
complex
Yeah.
layout.
Yeah. Well, it's content. I mean, it's content first approach, basically. That's what
Yeah.
we're doing. We're dealing with a content management system. So content should be the center of everything at first. How can this content be edited? And by centering on more of like the actual content itself, not thinking about things in like a home page or a category page stuff, you're modularizing and then thinking about, well, okay, these components can then be used on the homepage. They can be used on the category page by the author. We don't know in the future, 6 months from now, if they want to be able to use that component or block on this about page or something like that, which is another reason why other things we do is we don't use singles in the normal manner that a lot of people use singles. Singles for us is just used for something like settings and the homepage and maybe a custom 404, and that's it. Why? Because the entry types is what we've always used and always pushed to use, to have different page type entry types, so the site administrator, your client, can move things around within the site structure however they want, and they don't need to contact a developer to do that. So those are the kind of important things I think in content modeling, the things that I like to tackle first. Content, how it's going to be, what sort of data do we need for each of these sort of content rows, informed by the design, of course, and sort of the options that we're going to give the authors to do that. And that's, so going through and kind of outlining basically what we have. So as you can see, we have like preset rows, and I went
Can you
in
walk
and
through like one of these? So like specifically, like go to the design, show us
Mhm,
like how you show up whatever one of these rows, like projects row or yeah, like how are you
mhm.
thinking about one of those particularly?
Yeah, let's see where we go. Let me try to see. Well, a simple one would be this projects row, which is basically going to coincide with, let's see if we can get the, it's just basically a grid setup of this is going to be output from a section that they have, which is projects. These, of course, are the preview cards, which you usually can click on and go through. So the only thing that this really needs, we want them to be able to place this anywhere. It's going to be able to be placed on a project category listing page if they want to create it, but they can also use that same block and use it on the home page in the future if they decide to do that. So what are the options that we're going to give them? Then, so of course, obviously, we're going to give them a field for projects, right? And that'll be, in this case, it's just going to be limited. It's not going to be limited. It's just going to be for none. And what I'm thinking here to myself is that, okay, if they leave this field blank, then it's just going to automatically pull in projects. Projects are a craft section channel, so they have sort of a date order. It's going to pull in the list if they do that. But of course, they're going to want maybe to be able to display specific projects in this format, in this block. So that's why we give them an entry field to link to the projects, and they can do that way. If the other case I'm thinking is that, okay, if they don't want to select, they just want to show the latest, we're going to give them a drop down with the option of how many to display on the first, when the page loads, 5, 10, 15, 20, that sort of thing. This is also formed by the design layout, how the blocks are laid out. We do it that way. Then there's things like the project highlight row, and we also tend to divide things into, if it's a complex sort of situation like this project highlight row, we divide the fields now that we can with entry types in matrix blocks, is using a tab for content. So these are the fields. In this case, we're showing a project. They'll be able to select one project, and then all the options for the layout, which we're giving them, is in a settings tab, which is kind of tucked away. We'll give them some defaults that automatically shows up, and then with live preview, they'll be able to see that. But going into the settings tab, we'll give them the option for the type. They can, in this case, we'll give them a layout type, which is single image or two image. I also give them image overrides because these images that we're going to be pulling in, I'd probably be easier if I showed one. So this is the image that we're looking at for this case. So this is basically a project that's being pulled from the project section. These images obviously will be on the project in that channel itself. Okay. But that's an easy way for them. Okay, pull in this project, bang, it's in there. But we do want to give them something which is, in this case, is the image override. Say the images that they're using in this layout don't really line up. Horizontal, vertical, the focal point isn't right, that sort of thing. We'll be able to override these with just an asset field, whatever they want to put in there. The layout, because there's different types here, we're using the same block type row with all of these components. As you see, there's very different variations on where the images are at and where the content shows up. These variations, and even these, which is just a single image option with the content of whatever the preview is showing up above on the top, alignments on the left, on the right, vertical alignment, and all of these are contemplated in the different options that we have. So the other cool thing about with Craft 5 and the entry types now is we can use conditionals within matrix blocks as well. So we can show and hide fields that make sense to do that. We can go in and say, okay, if this field is the type of layout that it's selecting, then if they select a single one, then we're only going to give them the image override that will only allow them to override one image. If it's a double one, then it's the other one, which will allow them up to two. So it's putting like guardrails on things, making sure we keep those guardrails in place, but it also gives them, I think, a better authoring experience on that.
So in your experience, like, why is writing all of this out? Because you go through and you write all this out from the designs before you even dive into Craft, or at the same time, or you have Craft open and you're kind of playing with, here's how it is, and then you write down kind of your decisions after kind of playing with it in the control panel. Like, what's your actual process to getting to this written down, and where is the Craft build in relationship to by the time you write these down?
I think it's a mix of both. Actually, it's the first step is to think of the very most generic or the largest scale things, which are going to be the sections that are necessary. And kind of looking at those, you can just kind of write out by yourself and kind of think what they are. But the field structures and then the entry types, I will usually have Craft open wherever the build is and start, working with it, playing with it. It helps me to think about how the data is being structured and kind of reinforces the ideas that I had, or maybe I see some things like, oh, maybe that wasn't a good idea, so let's do it this way. So yeah, it does inform how I'm planning things, but I also start from a larger perspective to think about, okay, what sort of data is needed for each section.
Got it. I guess for these, just to follow through with the examples, then would you mind on that projects, those different rows that you showed?
Mhm.
Show us what the end result is in Craft for now on those.
Yeah, so let's see. In this case, let's open up a page. This is we're sort of playing around here with the content builder setup. We're going to give them a project highlight row. So this was going in here. Okay, so we're going to add a project. This would be, we don't have any projects in here now, but this would be selecting the project specifically. So this is the content. And then these are the settings that we have. So in this case, it's defaulting to 2 images. And then we have our override project images field where they can upwrite. And then these are the different layout components. So these coincide with, if it's a 2 image layout, so it would be these sort of different variations with the content in the lower right, upper left, that sort of thing like that. Of course, all of this is a lot more evident when using live preview, and they'll be able to see how that changes automatically. So yeah, these are the different options for that. We have the content alignment. But if I change it, of course, now using this one image option, now I have an asset field that only allows for one image to override, and also the content alignment options change according to the one image option which I've selected.
Got it.
So yeah, those sort of things is what you have to kind of think about, especially now with the ability of conditional fields within matrix blocks and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So then walk me through the rest of that. So like if you clicked live preview right now, would we
Mhm.
see anything?
No, there's no templating on it right now.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So so for you,
It's
is your
more.
process to get all of Craft set up and then you get into templating and get into the code?
Yeah, to me, I think it's a very a defining thing that you should focus on first, and not have to worry at the moment about how it's going to be rendered on the front end, sort of thing like that. It's more focus on the data model first. That's the idea. And by focusing on it, I mean thinking about it in ways that, because we can't tell the future, but thinking about creating this model in the most open way possible that things can be added to it easily. Don't paint yourself into a corner is more of the sort of the concept that I use. So yeah, focus. I like to focus on the actual data structure first. Once that's nailed down, which doesn't mean it can't change in the future, there could be, when you're going through the development process, there could be little tweaks that you have to do to it. But it's, once I've got that in the solid state, then I can start looking at, okay, now with each of these blocks, how am I going to start the code part kind of is when I come in with that.
So on this project, so where we are now, are you entering week 3 of coding or week 2? I forget.
It's two, actually, 1.5, I think. That's
Okay.
the thing. So the first one was kind of like going through it and working out some feature cards and stuff. I did the data modeling, which surprisingly went surprisingly quick with Craft 5. Was the way the flow is for creating sections, entry types, and fields.
Yeah.
So that sped things up quite a bit. And then I just started now beginning to kind of tackle the front end stuff, which is the global sort of data that we have. We don't use globals. We use a Craft single as a global, sort of thing, like in the settings section. So we go here. It was, setting this up was kind of getting the idea of what the data that we want for single data. And I set up structures for a navigation structure, again, using a matrix block and some link fields from Hyper. So that this is the other thing we have to think about. We want to give them the option to include the links that they want, and if there are sub menus, if that top link is going to be just a label, so it's just there it's like a no link just to open the sub menu, we have to give them that option as well. So like nav label or nav link, we give them that option. So that's kind of there, and we're doing that in this case for the design, as you can see. I'll go to a page that has a design. In this case, we're using the navigation is a little bit different because it's something that can change depending on page to page. So we have this navigation vertically over here on the left with slide out menus, and same sort of a navigation scheme down in the footer, which also runs it here. But when we look at it in the sort of home navigation within the project section of the listing page, let's see if this loads. It's not loading.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah,
So all right, so the workflow is you get the designs, you instantly think of the data model, and with our goal in mind of trying to make the data model reusable for authors as much as possible. We try not to lock them into like very static templates. There
Hmm.
are certain templates that will be more static than others, but you start with the most dynamic options. Kind of from there, you have some preset rows based on those designs that are kind of established
Hmm.
from there. But anyways, your process is to kind of go with that, and then to start building out craft first, kind of mapping it out, figuring that out, and then um once you're done kind of going through all of it and you basically have craft ready, they're essentially ready to enter content if they're ready to enter content without live preview. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. It's the other advantage of kind of getting the content model out of the way first is that we can put it, whether it be on the production side or staging side, the client can go in and start putting in data, which is an added bonus later on when you're working on front end templating because you have real content to work
Yeah.
with, which is always a plus. It's very convenient that a design layout mockup maybe only has one paragraph in it, but we all know content is variable, so it's nice to have that. So yeah, that's another advantage of taking that approach.
Yeah. And it's like, and this happens with designers a lot. Those cards, for example, on the projects, they're all nice and neat.
Mm,
Obviously the
yeah.
images, but all the text is 2 rows. All the little like tags that were in there are like little short names. They all fit together. But then they
Mhm,
start getting real content. The client starts putting things in and they
mhm,
realize like, oh, they want 4 lines. They don't have the copy that's short enough, or their tags is like there's some really long like technical word that then pushes other tags and wraps. And so you start to expose those things early while you're still in the build process and not in a later QA. And so like that's one of the things I also really like is like getting clients to get in final content early, even before live preview is ready.
mhm,
And they then kind of start getting a sense of it and giving feedback of like, hey, I thought I could upload an image here, but I can't. And
mhm.
so it kind of might expose some of those pieces. So that's fun. Um, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, there could be things that, like I said, the data modeling, it's not like you have to get it perfect the
Yeah.
first time around. You have to get a good solid, because yeah, there could be things that maybe you didn't think about at the moment, and but they can always be added in later. Or, as you suggested, could be something that the client was maybe trying to bring over, and you didn't capture that or didn't think about it the same way. So getting it there and nipping the problem in the bud is a lot easier when you're working on the content model first in that case.
Yeah. So can you go back to Basecamp and then show us a little bit? Let's go back out
Mhm,
to the bigger picture of the project and what you're working on.
mhm,
So in your work, so in this, you've got that card for that's feature, build, and infrastructure. So you've got things that are kind of done in that.
mhm,
And you've picked your current plugins that we're going to use, and you've got all that stuff. So then where have you moved to in the sense of the project management kind of communication aspect, like you've done with global items? Are you in content components? Where are you?
mhm. Right now, we're finishing up sort of. So what I tend to do when working on the front end stuff, this is where I kind of flip flop a bit.
Okay.
So I like working from both ends. So think about the back end and then the front end, and kind of meeting in between with your templating or something like that. So when building out sort of the actual visual elements that need to be in the project, I tend to take it sort of like static HTML, CSS, JavaScript, to build out UI components first. Put dummy data in there, however you want, put it in there, but get the styling right, get the markup right, get the markup accessible, get that done first. And then coming in, as you can see here, these are like UI tasks that I have done locally, which are going to be pushing up to the staging server for review. But these are more just centered on, okay, just going in and say, they have like, set up, this is what we're looking at, what we need to build. These are the different options that we have to go through and look to see the different like navigations types that we have in this case, which is for desktop and mobile. These are the different layouts that we have. So each of these tasks is kind of more centered on going through and get this right first, get the markup correct first, get the styling correct first. Once that's done, then we work on going to these tasks, which are a little bit more oriented. And these tasks are just for, okay, these components are done. Now let's hook them up to Craft. And this is the twig part where you're going in and interfacing. In this case, since this build is a sort of twig-based build,
Hmm.
this would be different, of course, if we were working on a headless build, which is something that would be more on the view end of sort of thing like that, or Nuxt. However, we're connecting the data. But in this case, we're meeting in the middle. We're taking the content model and the front end code, and we're meeting in the middle to mesh it together with Craft.
Okay. So your process is you get a design, you think of the content model, you set up Craft so that that content model is established. Then you go to the UI and you create dummy UI on that. Maybe you adjust Craft based on some decision, like, oh, I didn't think through that, and you kind of adjust your content model from there. But you don't have them connected yet, so you've got two separate pieces. I know one of the benefits for us too is if we have a bigger project, we can align, so we can have other people working on the UI. Somebody's working on the UI and somebody else is working on the Craft modeling, and then that final third step of that is that, as you're saying now, is that putting the pieces together in Twig, then putting the dummy, or at least lighting up the Twig HTML and stuff with live reactive kind of data at that point. And then at that point, it's hooked up and it's kind of ready to be QA'd and tested internally and with the client.
Yeah, definitely. It's and like in this stage where I'm at, I'm kind of like working on the global data. So what I've got going on here is just kind of looking at I've got the base functionality going of how these navigation elements are supposed to work. This is just like a placeholder image in the background, as you can see, but this sort of thing I've got working. Same thing with the footer going on. There's a background image of the footer, which is of course going to change size dynamically based on the viewport, all that stuff. So these are kind of like the basic global ones, the two pieces of the bread, that hold the sandwich, sort of thing like that we're working with. So yeah, that's where we're at now.
Awesome, very good. Well, why don't we leave it there? We'll check back in next week and just kind of see what other decisions and things you've done over the past week, and go from there. So, Michael, thanks for sharing this, and we'll see you next week.
All right, see ya.